do we feel God's presence? Do we feel it just occasionally, or do we feel it at every moment of every day in our life? Do we know who we are personally for God? Bible said we're intended to be the body of God, temple of God and people with God's Spirit. We were intended, in the ideal of creation by God, to be the object of love of God, one with Him, perfect as Him, as Jesus said in Matthew 5:48. Once Adam and Eve became one with God, and God's Spirit dwelled within them, then Adam and Eve would be the embodiment of God Himself. Therefore, in the fall, His daughter was violated by Lucifer that became Satan. We have not subdued the one who hurt God. Satan continues to maintain himself as the god of this world and to try to influence the lives of every person and family to live in evil and against God. John 8:44, 2 Corinthians 4:4. So God has been persevering with a hope to restore His ideal of creation in the midst of deep sorrow and pain. And this is the reality of the fallen world today, and the current spiritual war between Satan and God. Viewed from that perspective, Satan is both our enemy and God's enemy. We are from the fallen world and fallen history because the fall of Adam, Eve and Lucifer. What is God's grief? It is not just that He lost His children. No, it is far more than that. It is far deeper and more tragic than that. God lost true love and true ideal. He lost His children. God created Adam and Eve not just as His children. He created them so that Adam and Eve would become totally one with God, so that God's Spirit would completely dwell in their spiritual body. As also the Bible explains that we are temples of God and the Spirit of God dwells in us. 1 Corinthians 3:16. Many of us say that we want to know God's heart. Do we really want to know God's heart? Do we really want to know? Allow yourself to empathize with God, to imagine how He feels. In the beginning, God was all alone, but He had a burning desire to love, and to be loved. He decided to create a being whom He could love. He made a man and a woman, Adam and Eve. He wanted to love them with His whole heart and His whole mind. In that first family, God's daughter, Eve, was seduced by Satan, committed the fall with him, as explained in detail, perfectly, in the playlist Biblical Key, and she inherited Satan's nature and spiritual blood of sin rather than God's nature and heavenly blood. Worse than that, Adam, who was supposed to carry pure God's genes to multiply new children of God through Eve, pure and divine beings in history, was then seduced by his future wife, Eve, and inherited the evil spiritual nature. Blood and original sin caused the fall between Lucifer with Eve. Adam received from her and he became like her, inheriting Satan's nature and spiritual blood, rather than God's nature. The original sin therefore that was then multiplied in history, passing from generation to generation. From then on, they carried Satan's evil genes rather than God's divine imprinting. Well, we may ask, what does this have to do with us after a history of 6,000 biblical years? That was a very long time ago. Yes, it was, but it affects mankind to this day. Because it's a cancer that we have spiritually, and it's also reflected physically with so many diseases, psychosomatic problems in us. About the fall Lucifer with Eve, imagine we are ready to be married, and a man comes along and seduces our wife-to-be and has children with her. But we still love her. So, what do we do these days when a woman leaves a man? What do people say to such a man? They tell him that it is a tragedy, but that it is over and he has to move on with his life. That's what people say. Did God just get on with his life as if nothing had happened? No. No, he did not. For the love of humanity, his children, that would be multiplied through Adam and Eve, could not leave us all in the hands of Satan. God watched that family that was to be his family, which had become the family of his enemy. He watched as they had children, first Cain, then Abel. He watched Cain kill Abel, and he suffered tremendously that day. He saw the generations of men and women born, live and die with Satan's original sin and fallen nature, and he saw them become more and more barbaric. He repented also for having created man. Genesis 6:6. But immediately thereafter, God determined to save us, separate us from Satan and return us to be pure and divine beings, his children, through the providence of restoration centered on the coming of the Messiah, Jesus. We can describe the reality of humanity since the fall and Satan's world, using the phrases of a famous movie, Matrix, and spiritualizing them. We can help ourselves better visualize the spiritual and physical effects of the fall in our present world and in our personal lives, by using in perspective the phrases from a famous movie. The Matrix. As in the movie Matrix, when Morpheus, explaining Neo, What is the reality of Matrix in the world, which we can identify with the spiritual reality of Satan in our world today? He said to Neo. Matrix makes people see a world without rules and controls, a world where anything is possible. Matrix is the world that has been put before your eyes to hide the truth from you. That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born in chains. Spirituals, you were born in a prison. Spiritual, which has no bars, no walls, a prison for your mind. Spirit. And then Morpheus ends the conversation with a sentence that well paints our personal spiritual reality of life. With a phrase that is emblematic and unfortunately relevant to us as well. Billions of people living their lives unaware.